I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff.
This week on the podcast, we've got a cool interview for you with John from the Christianity on the Spectrum podcast. In this episode, we talk about a lot of cool things like autism and Christianity, Simone Weil, RFK Jr. He's not a cool thing, but we do talk about him, and what churches can do for autistic Christians. Very interesting conversation. I'm sure you'll learn a lot. Dean, what was your favorite part?
Oh man, it's a great question. Actually, the stuff about kind of the background of why RFK Jr. is the way that he is, or kind of at least why he's participating in the discourse in such a militant and bizarre kind of way, that was very helpful and interesting. I feel like I just see headline after headline of this person talking in a weird way about weird stuff, and it's nice to have somebody be like, well, it actually, there's like a whole history to this. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Super interesting. I'm glad that somebody's keeping track of it all. I'm glad that somebody isn't me and it's John. So let's go over to John and you can listen in to all of the big inside scoop about RFK Jr. This week on the pod, we have John, the host of Christianity on the Spectrum. John, do you want to introduce yourself and give an elevator pitch for your podcast and your work overall?
Sure, yeah. I'm not too good at doing elevator pitches, so maybe this will be a particularly long elevator, a space elevator, perhaps. So my name is John. I am a autism researcher and a Anglican, and I look primarily at extremely online autistic subcommunities, not just the extremely online ones, the sometimes online ones as well. So I've been doing this research more or less for the last 10 years. I have accumulated over 26,000 different online autistic Christians and ex-Christians and their posts and what they're saying about Christianity. I have run over 600 interviews at this point, like long-form, semi-structured interviews about experiences with Christianity, both the good and the bad and everything in between. I've sent out thousands I've sent out hundreds of surveys and got thousands of replies from them collectively. And I have a podcast in which I talk about that research and the intersection of Christianity and autism, particularly focusing on autism 1 or autism level 1, or what used to be labeled Asperger's or PDD-NOS or high functioning autism. It's now under DSM-5, got all collected into one broad category called autism spectrum disorder, and I look at autism 1 or low support needs autism. I am myself autistic. I was diagnosed at age 16, and I was described as, quote, the most typical case of Asperger's that I've ever seen by the guy who was assessing me. He was a family friend, and when I asked if I could be assessed for autism, he was like, wait, you don't already know? So that was kind of the deal with that. So I've known about it for quite some time. Like, in fact, I've known about it for so long that it was called Asperger's when I was diagnosed with it. And yeah, so I was raised evangelical, conservative evangelical. I mean, I I say conservative evangelical. It was Mennonite Brethren, but no one knows what a Mennonite Brethren is. So I just say conservative evangelical and hope they get the gist. Like every good Mennonite, I joined the army when I turned age 18. For those who don't get the joke, the Mennonites are pacifist. So that isn't something we typically see. But yeah, I joined the army when I was age 18, quickly deconverted from Christianity, and then saw a whole bunch of people around me who were also autistic, also came from similar backgrounds, and also deconverted in almost the same way. And I thought, this is really weird that it's happened like 8 times independently from all these different people of different backgrounds. Is there some sort of underlying interaction here going on with autism and Christianity? Or is this, just a weird coincidence in my little microcosm of the Royal Military College and Queen's University? Turned out not a coincidence. I looked at the peer-reviewed research and it was quite frankly pretty abysmal. And I thought, well, this seems like an interesting research problem that I am both interested in and want to know the answer to. So I'm just going to do the work myself. And I've been doing that basically for 10 years with all of my free time. So I now have a podcast where I try to explain the sort of difficult intricacies that come about with the intersections of both autism and Christianity.
Yeah, thanks, John. Now that we're at the top of this space elevator, we can really look down and get a kind of bird's eye view. I don't know, birds, I guess, don't survive in space. Whatever's up there, asteroid's eye view of your project. For folks who don't know, too, John has been a longtime Magnificast community person and voice and Discord participant, and it's been fun to also just, I don't know, be able to kind of travel that journey with you a little bit in the last several years, getting to know what you're doing. And I think it's been really kind of fascinating, especially to see all those different connections that you were just talking about kind of find their way into a podcast, which I've been listening to more and more in the last few weeks to prep for this. So I guess, I mean, if people don't get enough John in this episode, you can get a lot more John over on that podcast, and I encourage you to do it. You have a lot of episodes, especially talking about this kind of deconversion, reconversion dynamic. And they're really fascinating. Could you maybe give some listeners a taste of what they're getting into? What does that look like for you or for folks that you've been talking with?
Yeah, so I mean, deconversion is a really complicated thing. I'll just say that just before I forget about it, the Magnificast Discord has been like incredible for me over the years. It has been one of the few places where I was able to kind of work through a lot of the stuff I was going through, which, I mean, sorry to you guys for having to put up with that. But also the podcast has also been incredibly important to me. It introduced me to Marika Rose, who was very important in figuring out a lot of stuff that I was working through, and her book Theology of Failure was very important to me. And so I've loved the podcast, been listening for a while. But yeah, so I have mapped a lot of autistic deconversion and just how it happens. And the way that I like to describe it is it's like a cognitive dissonance pressure cooker is the sort of model that I use. So you can imagine that everyone has a certain capacity for cognitive dissonance. And Christianity is sort of a cognitive dissonance generator, right? Like there are, as you guys say, I think in your intro as well, it's Marika saying, what does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and you're always going to be faithful to some aspects and betray others? And that sort of process of trying to figure out just what the hell is going on causes a lot of internal friction. And people have various ways of dealing with cognitive dissonance. Christianity itself has a lot of technology built inside of it to deal with cognitive dissonance and to help you walk through that. And eventually, though, if enough cognitive dissonance builds, you hit your pressure capacity, and then usually what happens is something breaks. Like there is an inciting event that sort of pops this pressure vessel, and it cracks and explodes. and sort of rapidly starts to unravel itself. And because so many things in Christianity get deeply connected and intertwined, this creates like a sort of cascading chain reaction. And what I found when you compare like autistic people to non-autistic controls is that autistic people have less capacity for cognitive dissonance overall. We have more things cause cognitive dissonance within Christianity if you also have autism. And the types of things that cause cognitive dissonance tend to cause more in autistic people. And so you kind of have this perfect storm where the pressure vessel just fills up a lot faster, and it also destroys itself much faster as well. And so when you look at autistic people compared to their non-autistic counterparts, they are significantly less likely to be Christian when you control for all other like socioeconomic factors and like sociopolitical factors and things like that. And it's basically because of that, because Christianity is this sort of cognitive dissonance generating machine. And so for me, like a really big thing was young Earth creationism. You know, I was raised as a young Earth creationist. I was like, this is so obviously true. I got to university and was like, oh, never mind. This is so obviously wrong that it isn't even funny. How wrong it is. And so
And just to interrupt you, it didn't convince you that God had put all these fossils around the world just to trick you. That wasn't enough to kind of pull your dissonance down.
no, it actually wasn't. And no amount of watching Kent Hovind videos or Ken Ham videos was able to reduce my cognitive dissonance. There are some people for whom that works. I was not part of that subset. And I find most of the people that I survey were also not part of that subset. And then like I got into critical scholarship of the Bible, and that just basically blew the lid off. And I deconverted and unfortunately became a sort of very annoying Sam Harris style new atheist for much longer than is for more time than one should, basically. You know, when you deconvert from Christianity, I feel like you're allowed to have a little bit of a cringe new atheist phase. Mine extended far past the point that it was comfortable, and a lot of it because I was a officer in the military, and we were, you know, doing things in the Middle East, and Sam Harris's idea of foreign policy and how we should be acting and interacting with the various political goings on in the Middle East was something that appealed to me because it justified what I was doing morally. And I started to become a little bit more disillusioned with Sam Harris after I started getting my hands dirty, so to speak, and realizing that, oh, actually many of the clean narratives about what are going on and many of the things that are actually going on cannot be as simply disentangled. And I guess another one of those cognitive dissonance pressure cookers was going on in the background. And yeah, I ended up reconverting to Christianity after a pretty long time trying to reckon with the things that I was dealing with in the military. Like after I left the military, that's when I started like rethinking a lot of things, and eventually that led me to places like your guys' podcast and a few other places, and I started to realize that there were actually fairly decent Christian critiques of the types of things that I was now criticizing myself for, and I started sort of thinking about these things in a more Christian framework, and eventually just became like converted to Anglicanism. I was already attending the Anglican Church as an atheist because I was just like weird, I guess. You know, like I was openly and consciously an atheist at an Anglican church, and it was the Anglican Church of Canada. So they're like, oh, it's just cool to have someone under the age of 50 here. So they were pretty cool with it. It was probably really annoying to them, but yeah, I basically just came back then, and since then I've been trying to figure out the whole Christianity thing while also doing the research. And part of the reason I built the podcast is because I figured there would be more than just one person like me, like an autistic person with a very complicated relationship with Christianity, trying to figure out what exactly it is that's going on with this. And so, being a guy with a lot of data on this, who's researched it, I thought, well, I should make a podcast explaining these types of things. And so I guess that's kind of my trajectory and where I ended up there.
The Anglicans, they do love the young people. They love getting them in the door. So important for the future of the Anglican Church. I've been listening to a few of your episodes, and let's see, not the most recent one that you just posted, but the one before that. That's a meaningless descriptor to everyone listening to this because they'll be listening to it in the future. So all right, whatever. Anyways, it was an episode in which you were answering your own interview questions about sort of Christianity and autism. Very interesting. In that episode, you're talking about that reconversion experience, and there's I don't know, the way that you put it in the episode was just like, I don't know, I made a commitment to Christianity and like, that's why I'm still a Christian, which is great because that is a very Magnificast answer, a very Marika Rose answer. Do you want to talk more about, yeah, I mean, it's great. Do you want to talk more about that connection between how Marika Rose has helped you maybe articulate some of that stuff? That might be a cool thing.
Yeah, I actually cut a whole section from it that I realized would be very confusing to a person who didn't also listen to the Marika Rose or to the Magnificast podcast where I talked about building the Christian Gundam. And and I realized this is like when I was listening back to it, editing it, I went, no one's gonna know what the hell I'm talking about here. I should refactor.
There are people listening to this episode who probably have no idea what you're talking about, so that's probably a good choice.
Fair enough. Yeah. I decided to cut the descriptions of that. But yeah, so I mean, coming back to Christianity, like I had a lot of difficult feelings of basically a lot of Christianity, right? So you look back on the history of Christianity, and it is not simple, right? Like you see the good parts of Christianity, and I share a lot of the feelings that you guys have expressed a lot on this podcast, that sometimes when people on the left look back at Christianity, we look at only the good parts and only like the parts that we like, or we say things like, no, Mike Pence isn't a Christian, or whatever, or JD Vance, he's not a real Christian. But there is a genuine complexity with Christianity that you sort of have to deal with just on its face. Like it just comes at you, and you have to figure out a way to maneuver within that space, right? And the only way that I was able to do it was through reading A Theology of Failure, and just the thing that I think that I really got from that book was her giving me permission to just say, actually, this really sucks. Like, this really sucks and I don't like it. However, it is a suck that I am going to learn to live with because there is no way that I could ever come to a place where I'm not going to have to make a lot of these trade-offs. And it's sort of about acknowledging and living with the trade-offs that you yourself are willing to make, and sitting in that tension between the both good things and obviously very bad things within the Christian tradition, and not trying to deny that there are any bad things, but also, not being like it's only bad things there.
Yeah, and I mean, talk a little bit more about that too, because I think, well, first people should go listen to that interview with Marika Rose. It's very good and great, and gives some good language to this kind of dynamic. But I think some people will naturally think like, well, if Christianity is so messed up, then why bother? Why reconvert? Like, you already got out, so why come back in one way or another? What's the process of committing and why to Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, I did three, actually I did four, but I cut one of the episodes about why I came back to Christianity. It was a 3-part episode, and the easiest way I can explain it is there was this quote that I read from Simone Weil. I'll pull it up. Weil says in a letter where she's like watching these wives of Portuguese fishermen go to escort their husbands out to sea. She wrote in a letter, the conviction was suddenly born upon me that Christianity is preeminently the religion of slaves, and that slaves cannot help but belong to it, and I among others. And I I felt a lot of resonance with that, and that the part that drew it to me was, you know, I was a very Nietzschean guy in my 20s, I'll say. If there was one way that you could sort of describe the ethical outlook that I had, it was very similar to what you would find in like the modern tech right. The sort of attitude was the strong will do what they can and the weak will suffer what they must, like that classic bit of the Melian dialogue. And so I read this Polish uh, writer named Tadeusz Borowski. He wrote a book called This Way to the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen, which is about his reflection of being a prisoner in the concentration camps as a left-wing political prisoner. And he has this whole very long dialogue about thinking about antiquity and thinking about the ancient world and how we always look at it and we look at the heroes of the ancient world and not how those heroes were basically presiding over massive slave empires that were just death and destruction and horrors. So he compares the state of slaves in antiquity to the state of them in the Holocaust, like in the political prisoner camps at Auschwitz. And so like in that he he talks about the sort of solidarity with slaves, and then when and I found his whole critique very pointing, but in like a bad way. Like it was pointing directly at me. There was this quote in it. There can be no beauty if it is paid for by human injustice, nor truth that passes over injustice in silence, nor moral virtue that condones it. And I mean, so the essay this is from is called Auschwitz, Our Home, which is his whole reflection of this. And one of the starting lines that sort of illustrates his critique is, we are laying the foundations for some new and monstrous civilization. Only now do I realize the price that was paid for building the ancient civilizations. The Egyptian pyramids, the temples, the Greek statues, what a hideous crime they were. And that linkage, and then thinking about, okay, well, what are we actually doing right now? And is this fundamentally really different? Like, sure, it might not be as bad, but is that really something worth sort of teasing apart, or should we actually like sit with that and deal with that? And I found Vey's connection, the sort of anti-Nietzscheanness of that phrase, combined simultaneously with Borowski's critique of, I guess, modern Western imperialism, as I was reading it, and making that connection that Christianity is preeminently the religion of slaves, and slaves cannot help but belong to it. I felt like the right thing to do is to throw your lot in with them and to be in solidarity with them. It will like not be good. It's not going to, this isn't going to be perfect. This isn't going to work, but that's sort of the best thing that you can do. And that's where I get the, like, why are you a Christian? Because I am, and you're not getting rid of me type of thing is where that comes from. But yeah, you probably were able to see in that episode a lot of influence from this podcast in some of my answers, but yeah.
You mentioned Simone Weil too, and I think that kind of finding those figures who are attending to some of the best parts of Christianity and also some of the ambiguities of it and so on, I think that's such an interesting challenge, and she comes up a lot in your own podcast, and is also somebody who suggested maybe has had autism and so on. And what kind of attracts you to her, or what do you think might even be important about seeing her maybe wrestling with some kind of similar questions or a similar set of circumstances?
Yeah, so I mean, Vey is one of those people who both has a lot of good and bad with her simultaneously that can't really be unteased. Like she's got like a very clear anti-Semitism problem. If you read her, like there's really no getting away from that if you actually go through it, and not in a way where you can like sort of separate that from the rest of the good. You sort of have to swallow the pill whole. She also has like a lot of mental hangups that you very typically see in autistic people that might not be the most healthy. You know, like in terms of her being autistic, you can't retroactively diagnose people. Um, it's a bit anachronistic. Autism wasn't a thing when she was alive, and we can't know for sure. However, I have read many biographies of her and many accountings of her, and just read a lot of her writings. And as someone who reads a lot of the writings of autistic people, you know, you start to pick things up. And while I can't be sure that she was her life, the way people described her, the way people described her interpersonal interactions and things like that, I think it can be safe to say something was going on there where, you know, is it autism or is it something slightly different? I don't know, but she certainly wasn't neurotypical. You know, she was certainly outside that branch of normality. And, you know, she's just a very intense person, has extremely strong moral convictions, and takes them to their most horrid logical conclusion. And even if that means like a sort of self-emaciating self-sacrifice. You know, she struggled with a lot of problems that autistic people frequently struggle with, like eating disorders and scrupulosity and things related to that. And so I found her writing both like cautionary in the sense that I read it and I go, "Oh, I see she's making a lot of mistakes that I frequently make myself that I can sort of learn from to not do or be like, "Oh, I'm going in this very unhelpful direction that I can recognize in her, but now I can recognize that in me as well." And I mean, I see the same thing in autistic people all the time, where it's like, I recognize this tendency. Let's try to back the bus up a bit. But you know, she also is, I think, very admirable. She was extremely morally consistent. She put her money where her mouth was, right? Like there, when she had convictions, she lived up to them. Even when, you know, those convictions were wildly inaccurate. Like she refused to live without heating in her apartment because she believed that the French factory workers that she was working with also didn't have heat in their apartments. They did have heat in their apartments. She just believed that they didn't, and so she lived without heat. And so there's that sort of like sense of radical solidarity, but also in like a really weird way that I really relate to. And so she's one of those like deeply complicated figures that I nonetheless find extremely relatable. And when I read her, I feel like I get it. Like I understand what she's saying and why she's saying it. She doesn't always say good things, but you know, she does. There is just a lot of good stuff in her. And one of the things that she did for me was sort of unlock a lot of my mental hangups that I was having around Christianity, because she was able to sort of explain it in a way that I hadn't ever had Christianity explained to me. Like I grew up conservative evangelical, then my other interactions were through like new atheism. So, you know, perhaps got a certain skewed version of what Christianity is and could be. And they really brought in a completely different way of thinking about it that I was able to wrap my head around in a way that I hadn't before. Like I read a collection of her essays in a book called Awaiting God, and I was like, I think I can actually do this. Like I get what's going on here. And so that's, yeah, the podcast avatar is Simone Weil. and wherever you see the podcast, it'll be Simone Weil. But yeah, that's just there because also she is one of the most frequently referenced authors in autistic Christians who remain Christian. You know, that's a pretty big one. Who remain Christian? But of those that do, she's one of the main ones referenced.
Cool. It's such a interesting thing to hear. I mean, you talked about Simone Weil in the Discord, like, I don't know, a lot, a lot, and it's in productive ways, and it's great to hear that. It's great to have that on the podcast for everyone else here too. Let's pivot a bit though, and let's talk about some of the research that you've been doing. You've got interviews, you've been talking to people, you're reading posts, you're in the minds of the internet, getting down and dirty with this stuff. Tell us, I guess, like what is the connection that you find so interesting about autism and Christianity? What is it that you're like looking for with that kind of what are you looking for in that research? What have you been getting out of it? I don't know. Tell us about it all.
So I mean, autistic people develop narrow restrictive interests in very specific subjects, and the one I developed a narrow specific interest in was autism and Christianity. So like it's a very weird like meta game of interest and yeah, so I am just interested in it because for a reason I can't articulate other than I find it fascinating. And the more I look into it, I learn things about myself because I see it repeated in so many other people and I go, "Oh, this isn't just a me thing. This is maybe an us thing." And maybe there are things that I can tease out here. And then also the other part of it is I get to share that information with other people and it has really helped them, right? Like, I talk to a lot of ex-Christians who are like, you are the first person who was able to articulate why I left Christianity in terms that I would be willing to recognize myself. You get a lot of people who are like, you only left because you wanted to sin and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, no, that's not what data shows. Like the data that I've collected shows that actually they left because they realized there were wild inconsistencies with a doctrine they were being forced to believe and could not handle the cognitive dissonance of trying to believe that while being in there. And then, just also helping autistic people reckon with their own faith. So a thing that comes up a lot is I'm sure you've heard the phrase a personal relationship with Jesus. Yeah, that is all. Yes, yes. Perhaps perhaps you yourself have one. Uh, Around 85% of practicing autistic Christians do not, and do not recognize this language and don't quite understand what people are trying to get at. And that makes them feel very alienated. That makes them feel very confused because everyone's talking about this personal relationship with Jesus, and it's the best thing ever. And you're like, but what is it? Right? Like what actually are you saying and what do you actually mean? And I can come in as a translator who's like, okay, this is what they mean, and also this is why you're not able to parse this. And also, by the way, that's completely normal. It is 100% normal for a person with autism to not have a personal relationship with Jesus because your brain parses relational data in very different ways. And what they are trying to articulate is something closer to like discipleship or something like that. And yeah, it's normal to not have an emotive component to this because your brain just works differently than other people's, right? Like, and within Christian theology, like there are some deeply unhelpful things that come up. Like, there was a Catholic theologian named Andrew Pinsent who coined the term spiritual autism to describe like a reprobate a state of reprobation apart from God, where you are like unable to access the indwelling of the Holy Spirit because of your condition. And he goes, whoa, 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 guys, I wasn't talking about real autism. I'm talking about spiritual autism here. And it's like, okay, but like you kind of are here. Like you can say as much as you want, oh, I'm not talking about real autism, but you're using autism as a metaphor for like internal human brokenness. And that is a metaphor that, most people don't know who Andrew Pinsent is, But if you, or like who Eleanor Stump is, but if you go through a Catholic seminary, you're probably going to encounter them, especially if you look at ethics in Aquinas. And those ideas get passed down through clergy, and then those clergy disseminate those ideas to people. And there's a sort of idea that there is one way to do Christianity, and there is one way to practice Christianity, and there is one way to experience Christianity. And I can come in and say, no, actually, there isn't. And I have the data to prove it, which is a really big thing for a lot of autistic people. Like they want to see the numbers, and I'm like, I can actually give those to you. Um, but yeah, that's why I like it. That's why I enjoy doing it. But also, it's not all enjoyable. If you look through the recent episodes, you will see some episodes on things like the autistic Christians in the pronatalism movement, which is a, sort of tech right adjacent group of autistic Christians who are kind of wild, in many ways, to put it mildly. And yeah, so you also see things like that. The One of the things you'll hear about autism if you go on the internet is autistic people have a strong sense of social justice. And this is true to an extent. We do have a very strong sense of justice, like a very strong sense of right and wrong. However, this does not actually have a moral dimension to it. It can go anyway. So you have people who have a strong sense of moral justice that leads them to campaigning for the rights of immigrants and doing like anti-ICE work and demonstrations right now in Chicago. And you also have autistic people with a strong sense of social justice who dedicate their entire life to praying the rosary outside an abortion clinic. This is the basically same impulse being applied in a slightly different place. And I often say that like autism is bimodally distributed, meaning you will find basically autistic people on the two ends of each pole on basically any issue, and autistic Christians are no exception to that. So you will get disproportionate representation in Christian socialist and Christian communist spaces. You will also get disproportionate representation in alt-right spaces and guys who, spend a little too much time fantasizing about Rhodesia, unfortunately. And so you get basically the full spectrum of ideological belief, and you find some people who you're like, oh, this is so cool, and it is awesome that you have managed to like really get into liberation theology and interpret things this way that is bringing you towards pro-social action. And then you also get guys who are like, I wish you would do less of that. uh, so yeah, that's what it's like in the trenches. It is a land of contrasts, I'll say. I've had to get really, really good at talking to especially young autistic men about Jordan Peterson, which is something I do a lot of. So I've listened to far too many episodes of Jordan Peterson and the people around him so that I can understand the autistic men that I'm talking to. So yeah.
Man, so interesting. So many things that you just said are very interesting. Especially you made this comment about kind of assuming there's one way to do Christianity, and people with autism, I guess, just kind of disprove that notion in a very existential way, that there's lots of ways of doing that. And I think that's really fascinating. And maybe we can come back to that in a moment, kind of what the church does or doesn't do to make room for folks. But you were saying, so people with autism end up on these kind of on two sides of the spectrum. But also autism itself is becoming a politicized kind of identity or a politicized issue, whatever. So you have people like RFK Jr., trying to basically do eugenics and figure out how to eradicate autism through also, it seems to me, bizarre assumptions about what autism is or isn't. So talk a little bit more about that. Like what's going on with that politicization of autism, and how is it maybe shaping people's understanding of that whole phenomenon?
Yeah, so this actually has its roots in the 1990s with a discourse that I call the Autism Wars. And so it sort of popped off in 1993 when a guy named Jim Sinclair gave a talk at an autism conference. So autism conferences, basically autism was like, no one knew what it was in the 90s, right? And so most of the people who were doing anything with autism were the parents of children who were profoundly affected by autism, who had like intellectual and developmental disabilities related to autism. And so they would get in groups together to try to exert pressure on governing bodies to help their kids with special education and things like that. And Jim Sinclair was an adult who was diagnosed with autism, and he gave a talk at this conference, and the talk was titled "Don't Mourn for Us." You know, autism at this point was sort of seen as like a tragedy and a thing that if it happened to you, basically your life is over and you're screwed. And the whole goal is to find the cure to autism. And Jim Sinclair came in and was like, wait a second, I'm an autistic adult and I quite like my life. I'm not sure I want to be cured. And so he gave a speech to that effect, and that was highly polarized and sort of started to split the community in two, where you had the parents of children who have what we would now call ASD 3 or high support needs autism, where you will have a child that basically needs 24/7 round the clock care and has very limited independence and will basically require care until they die. And then you have other people on the autism spectrum like me who can live independently. Like I have a wife, I have a kid, I have a job, and there obviously come tensions from that because we're both on the autism spectrum. And so you will have self-advocates who are like, hey, maybe we should start thinking of autistic people as human beings first, not problems that need to be solved. And then you have autistic parents who are like, actually, this is a problem that needs to be solved. And so the parents eventually went on to form a group called Autism Speaks. And Autism Speaks is sort of very controversial within communities of autistic adults. For mostly it's very highly polarizing language that it used to use. It's since changed the language that it's used, but I mean it basically just changed the language that it used. It hasn't really changed much else. So you got a good neurodiversity washing of Autism Speaks. So now it affirms you while it carries on doing exactly what it does. And their job is or their goal is to treat autism and cure it. And then you have what became ASAN, or the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network in America. In different countries, it's called different things, but in America, it's called ASAN. And they are communities of self-advocating autistic adults who are like, we aren't problems to be solved. We are people with disabilities that need supports. And so, what should the government be focusing its money on? Trying to figure out a way to make sure that none of us ever come into the world again, or dealing with, now that we're actually in the world, how do we support these people so their lives aren't miserable? And so this is what is I call the autism wars, is the conflict between these two groups at their fundamental level. And when it comes to RFK was actually radicalized specifically by the parents of autistic children. So he had basically no bone in this fight. And then a lot of autistic parents saw him and were like, we're going to make him our champion, mostly because the Kennedys have a history of having, like, Rosemary Kennedy, who was institutionalized. And so they were like, we can use that. And so they started pressuring him, and he's sort of in the woo biomedical, alternative biomedical space. So are a lot of these parents of autistic children, mostly because they are in an under-supported state, right? They aren't getting the help they need, and so when your child has some serious things going on, you will reach for anything that is in your grasp. And so If they tell you that your child has gut parasites that you can get rid of by drinking bleach, you will give your child bleach. Like I say that that isn't an actual joke. Like that is a treatment for autism in some of these communities. It's drinking bleach. Very bad. Do not do this, listeners of the Magnificast, please. Yeah, but so basically, RFK gets radicalized by these parents of autistic children, and then as we all saw the election going down, as part of Trump's attempt to build a coalition, he said, okay, you can become the health secretary, and that sort of kicked off. Most of what RFK says about autism is sort of just wrong, like, and also deeply confused. So he talks about things like the exploding rates of autism, and we don't know why it's happening. The reality is we do know why it's happening. We know pretty much exactly why it's happening. In 2013, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual changed its definition of autism and greatly expanded it. We didn't think girls could get autism for a long time. And turns out girls do get autism. And so what happens, I mean, I say we didn't think they got autism. We thought it was very rare in women. Turns out it's not. Turns out it's fairly common in women. We don't know the exact ratio of men to women, but it used to be assumed to be like 10 to 1. It's a lot closer to something like 1 to 1.5 to 1.4, depending on which estimates you go for. And so, you're now including half the population in your statistics that weren't included before. What's that going to do to your rates? Like a whole bunch of, we didn't think you could get ADHD and autism at the same time, and it turns out that's a very common combination. And so if you get diagnosed with ADHD first, which is more likely given the way that we are doing it, and now you can get diagnosed with both, what's going to happen? And so there are a whole bunch of like double diagnosis things that came in, and then funding for schooling and things like that. If you got like intellectual disability, your school would get X amount of funding. And now you get the autism tag, you get more funding. And so if you are a special needs person who is trying to get help for these kids, I mean, I've talked to several counselors and they have said things like, look, if what I needed to get this child help was to diagnose them as a zebra, then like I will do that, right? To get them the help and the support they need, because this is how the sort of medical and insurance industry works in the United States. And there are all these contingent factors and all these like complications that come into it that do increase rates, but it's rates of diagnosis, not rates of prevalence. And when he's giving most of his stats, he's including people like me, and people like me are the ones who have been exploding in diagnosis. And so it's like, okay, yes, there is an explosion, but he talks about the explosion of being autism, making everyone think it's like ASD3. It's actually ASD1. And then he only talks about ASD3, and it gets very complicated. That isn't to say that like people with ASD3 don't deserve care and don't deserve support. They absolutely do. They need it more than all of us, right? It's just everything he does around it is deeply unhelpful. And like the types of things that would actually help a lot of these families. So like RFK also massively cut special education and like the Department of Education. What do you think is helping most of these families right now? It's special education. And that's like the funding mechanism through which they get support. Right now, there's a massive caregiver crisis where we just don't have enough people working in these fields who can support them. And what are we doing? We are cutting those departments and we are suppressing their abilities to actually get people in to support them. And so, RFK is the champion of these parents, but the policies that they're pushing are policies that sort of systematically impact everyone in a very bad way. And, the Tylenol causing autism thing, I mean, I know a lot of us joke about that. I have been known to drop a few memes like Tylenol, the official sponsor of the LCMS, which is, if you were curious, the proportionally the most autistic denomination out of all of them is Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Probably will come to no surprise to anyone who knows guys in the LCMS, but yeah, so like the Tylenol thing, initially there were concerns about that in 2017. We did further systematic reviews of it, and we found no, this isn't actually the case. Tylenol is not linked to that. It just turns out that like there are other co-occurring factors with it, and when you do better analysis of the data, this does not bear out in reality. But they need something to pin it on, right? They said they were going to solve autism by September or whatever, and so they basically just come up with a convenient answer because, like one thing I said in an episode that got several people in my audience upset and many angry emails was that RFK doesn't actually care about autism, right? He cares about the aesthetics and he cares about like what he thinks. Like if they actually cared about autism, they would not be cutting the Department of Education. They would not be cutting special needs funding. And they are. And so like yeah, autism gets heavily politicized and it basically just hurts everyone involved in deeply unhelpful ways. And like the things that would help autistic people universally across the board are things like federal housing guarantees, um, universal health care, not having to fight insurance companies to get treatments for your children, better education, better special education policies, all these types of things. And yeah, so I you can probably tell I'm not RFK's biggest fan.
Yeah, well, neither are we. Great, great. I mean, that whole dynamic is super interesting, and I appreciate you laying it out like that. It's really helpful to have that sort of background and I don't know, have a way to sort of map those differing sides in the intellectual history. That's great. You're just mentioning some things that would be helpful for autistic people with regard to support. Those all sound great. I love those things. But I wonder what you would suggest to churches. Um, how can churches be, not just welcoming to people who have autism, but spaces that support their liberation and invite them into other liberation struggles that maybe guide them away from the Jordan Peterson end of things?
Yeah. Great question. Wish I knew how to guide them away from the Jordan Peterson side of things, other than, having very long talks about, okay, this guy doesn't actually understand what postmodernism is. We really need to talk about this. I'm not the greatest postmodern understander in the world, but let me tell you, this man does not get it. Anyway, this is always a really hard question to answer because it really depends on your church. Right now, I think one of the biggest problems is no one knows what's going on with autism, right? You say autism to one group of people, it'll mean one thing. You say it to another, it'll mean something else. And a lot of people just like don't know what's going on. And so knowing is half the battle type of thing. There are a few good books that I would recommend that come out of the Center for Autism and Theology out of Aberdeen. There's one by Grant McCaskill, and there is one by Leon Van Omen called A Liturgical Theology, which is or what's it called? I'll look it up one second. Autism and Worship, a Liturgical Theology. Um, and so there's that book and a few others. I mean, I would say if you are interested in very long, detailed breakdowns of autistic subcommunities and the dynamics within them and how those interact with Christianity, you can listen to my podcast to learn more about that. But there are also like 60 episodes. I don't expect any reasonable person to make it through all of those. But yeah, so the biggest thing is just learn what it is. I find a lot of people try to help before understanding what it is that they're dealing with, and that often doesn't lead to great outcomes. Because, you're trying to help, but you don't know what exactly it is you're helping. In terms of like steering people away from unhelpful places, is I think we need to get better at speaking to specific concerns that autistic people have. Like there is often a profound economic alienation in a lot of these people, and you know, a lot of their biggest concerns are like, I have autism and autism makes it very difficult for me to get a job. And instead of being like, hey, let's work on jobs programs or let's talk about accommodations that we can make. It's like, you know why you have that? Because women are in the workforce. And and because there sort of aren't as many competing narratives to them, they go, you know what? You are right. It is the women who are in the workforce. And that that leads to some deeply unhelpful places. But yeah, and things like that. I mean, just mostly from my own personal experience, a lot of these people are just profoundly socially isolated and need someone who can talk to them and explain to them what's going on. And I fill that role as best I can, but I'm sort of one guy. Um, but yeah, so learn what's going on is the first step, and then the second step is talk to them. So once you learn what's going on and what the sort of problem set is, um, talk to them or their families, um, to just figure out what you can actually do for that particular person. Unfortunately, they're like for people who have physical disabilities, there are things like, wheelchair ramps that you can install in your church. Wheelchair ramps are great, or, Braille and alternatives or closed captionings and things like that. Unfortunately, there isn't like a wheelchair ramp for autism. It's sort of like it's a much more complicated accommodation space. You can do a lot of things. So one thing I recommend churches do is you have a detailed breakdown of what happens in your church service. Just on your website, go to it. A lot of autistic people really struggle with figuring out what they are supposed to do in a situation, when it's often very socially confusing, very hard to navigate. But if you have a thing on your church website that just says, okay, you are going to walk into the church, someone is going to greet you, and they are going to hand you a bulletin. Take the bulletin or don't. We don't care. Sit down in the pew. The bulletin, if you took it, is going to have a detailed list of things. You can say the things in the black, in like the bold in the black. You like listen to the other things. You don't have to say them if you don't want to. And just give like very detailed verbose instructions about what's going to happen and what to expect to happen in the service, and that can often really help reduce stress and things like that. But like again, that will work for a portion of us. That will not work for a different portion of us, unfortunately, when it comes to complex neurodevelopmental disabilities. Then you also get like complex problems that come with them. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I guess the thing I'm taking away is, it's a kind of dialogue or something that you gotta be constantly thinking through and just being open to learning more about. I think that's really helpful, and helpful to have your podcast as a resource for that too. As we're getting to the end of the hour, if there's one thing that you'd want people to know about autism and Christianity, what would it be?
If there is one thing that I would like them to know, it is that autism is a complex, heterogeneous neurodevelopmental disability. It does not have one appearance. It has many different appearances and many different facets. There are no silver bullets. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions. And when you mix a complex heterogeneous neurodevelopmental disability with a complex heterogeneous religion, you get even more complicated relationships. And so there expect a lot of weird things and don't expect simple answers or sort of one size fits all solutions. to this type of thing. So that's the thing I would try to get across.
That was more than one thing, but I'll let it slide. I think that seems good. Cool, John. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Deeply appreciate it. We've been trying to have you on the show for a long time and have been failing at it at every turn. But for now, do you want to tell people where they can find your podcast?
Yeah, so you can find my podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, just Christianity on the Spectrum. You can, I have a Substack where I mostly post joking takes about autism that are sort of half serious. I call it Dispatches from the Autism Wars. Where, if you are looking for hard-hitting analysis about how we need to split the spectrum between people with low feelings autism and high feelings autism, you will find it there. You will literally not find another type of autism analysis like that. is something I say. This might not be a good thing. Anyway, so you can find me there. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Christianity On. You can find me on Blue Sky at christianityon.bluesky.social. You can also email me at christianityonthespectrum@gmail.com. Yeah, that's that.
Great. Well, thanks, John. It's been really fun to get to know you better on this side of the podcast, and looking forward to seeing more great memes in our Discord and following along with the podcast Christianity on the Spectrum. We encourage everybody to go check it out. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. Go check out John's show. You know where to find it now, and you should go find it right after listening to this one. Don't do anything else. Keep doing the dishes, keep cleaning the floor, whatever you do when you listen to this show. Just throw on an episode of Christianity on the Spectrum. You're going to love it. Our music is by Mario Armstrong. The outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. Beside what else are you gonna do? As we kissed in the alley by the Michigan Theater, fall snow was glowing in the lights of the downtown. Saw a spark in your eyes, I just spoke it. Said we're gonna turn this whole place upside down. Then you said, my dear, do you really mean this? I said, I only know what I feel right now. I said, poets lie, sometime come true. Stay awake with me, where see what we can do. Poets lie, sometime come true. Stay awake with me, where see what we can do in my town. I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. This the kind of town folks get stuck in. Yeah, people get stuck here, but I chose to stay. If you ever want to know something, or know someplace, you just can't know them all. At some point, you must make a choice and choose someplace and make a home. There was a time not long ago when we look out this window and see a wolf pack running free. Except there'd be no window or this building separating us from all the life we see. Behold, the Lord makes all things new, and that sounds good, I want to do it too. Oh dear God, destroy my city, make it a place that wolves think pretty. So when I come back here and stay, I want to hear them howl someday. In my lifetime, in my place, before my body's down in the grave. Before my body's down in the grave, in my place.